Right. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the second Physics Beyond community event. Today, we're going to have Navvye talking about reviving his native language Kangri and doing that in an interesting way, namely using an AI model called Whisper. What's Whisper? Whisper is a pre-trained AI model for converting audio to text. Navvye had to retrain it for his use case and adapt it to help him solve his problem. Not only is the project itself super interesting and exciting, but also the idea how to approach the problem using AI. I think this idea is extremely important because this is something we're going to be doing in the future more and more in maybe all fields of research. We will increasingly use pre-trained models, which we will then have to adapt to our needs and implement in our project. So here we go. It's your stage, Navvye.
All right. Thank you, Dr. Ba. So, as Dr. Ba said, I'm trying to save my native language called Kangri. And so I'll just be starting with the presentation. If you can see the top left corner, that's just a cheeky Physics Beyond for the win. Moving on, so today we'll be having I'll be dividing this into four contents. About the language, what is Kangri, where is it spoken, and how do I know about it? The second is automatic speech recognition, what exactly ASR is and how exactly I use it and how it helps us. Then the third is cross-lingual phoneme recognition, which is the specific technology that I used in my ASR. And the fourth is challenges I faced and tips and how, well, I'm from a city. So there's always this sort of notion that city people don't really interact well with those from villages because they lead naturally different lifestyles, and how I was able to sort of dismantle that notion, in my opinion. Right, so moving on, just a little bit about me first. So I'm Navvye. You can also call me Navvye. Navi, anything works. I'm a polyglot. I can speak around 5 languages fluently. And I love learning new languages. One of the main reasons I love doing so is because my grandfather was also a polyglot, and he he spoke 7 to 8 languages fluently. Compared to him, my linguistic abilities seem meager. And so it's just sort of an attempt to honor him. He sadly passed away last year. And he used to love talking about Punjabi, which is a close linguistic. Right. So about the language, Kangri. So as you can see, there are two different scripts over here. The first script is actually, if you look at about the language, the first script is the Tankri or the Takri script. It was used by the Maharajas and the kings of the region, and it slowly fell into disuse. In fact, even though it is the native script of Kangri, it's no longer used. And the second one is the Devanagari script, which is the most commonly used script in India. It's used for Hindi, it's used for other dialects of Hindi like Haryanvi, and it's also used for Kangri. So Kangri is a language spoken predominantly in the Kangra Valley region of Himachal Pradesh, which is a state in India, as well as in some regions of Punjab, which is where my family is originally from. So Hoshiarpur, Roopnagar, Gurdaspur, all of these are regions in which Kangri is spoken fluently. Now, here's something interesting. Like with most other Indo-Aryan languages, Kangri forms a dialect continuum, which means that it is somewhat mutually intelligible to the neighboring languages such as Dogri to the north and Punjabi to the south. It is somewhat mutually intelligible with the most commonly spoken language in India, which is Hindi, but more about that later. There are nearly 1.2 million speakers of Kangri. However, there has been a sharp decrease in the number of speakers, and many Kangri children are not learning it as their mother tongue anymore. And the pandemic naturally exacerbated the conditions. In May 2021, Kangri was placed on the International Dashboard of Endangered Languages and was categorized as definitely endangered. And as previously mentioned, the Takri script went out of use decades ago and has since been replaced by the Devanagari script. And the usage of the Devanagari script hasn't been standardized throughout the region. So there are many different ways in which people can actually spell the same thing, which is, well, this is just foreshadowing, but this is one of the problems I faced as well. Now, why is it important to record Kangri? Well, since most of the cultures, traditions, and stories of languages such as Kangri exist only in an oral form, it is important to record them in case the transmission of knowledge gets interrupted. So let's say that your grandfather and his great grandfather and so on, they've been telling you a story about a story that has some cultural significance to you. And for some reason, you just decide not to continue the trend. And that means that knowledge over a millennia years old can just vanish just like that. And therefore, it's extremely important to record the culture and the tradition and the stories of Kangri. All right, now that I've given a brief introduction to Kangri, I'll be moving on to automatic speech recognition. So, automatic speech recognition, or ASR, is basically just a fancy word for speech to text. However, don't confuse this with its opposite, text to speech. That is like a little different. Right, so the standard preservation technique used by linguists revolves around painstakingly transcribing hours and hours of audio recordings in the relevant languages. So I know for a fact that many linguists involved in field work, as they call it, will visit a region, try to get a brief sense of what the phonology is. They will translate a list of languages. They'll translate a list of words into that language. It's usually called the Jakarta Leipzig list of words, and then they'll try to figure out the phonology, the morphology, the syntax, and on top of that, the translation of the words manually. As you can see, it's a lot to do manually, and it often leads to errors, even by the most skilled linguists. So ASR is basically a technique that is used to bypass these so-called transcription bottlenecks. Through ASRs, researchers can create auditory corpuses with specific phonemes and utterances, allowing them to streamline the transcription process and overcome bottlenecks. And the most interesting part of this, in my opinion, is that recent advancements in ASR have made it possible to achieve similar word error rates with substantially lesser amounts of data and lesser training time. In 2017, there was this vastly influential article published, which says attention is all you need, which introduced the transformer models, and it was basically a new simple network architecture called the transformer, which dispensed all the recurrence and convolutional neural networks in an encoder decoder configuration. So that was something that was very interesting, and that's sort of what sparked the ASR growth in recent years. There has also been research pushing the limits of techniques such as semi-supervised learning by Zhang et al., unsupervised learning, and joint supervised and unsupervised learning by Bai et al. And also part of ASR is cross-lingual speech recognition, a process that leverages patterns and resource-rich languages to recognize the utterances in linguistically similar but resource-poor languages. So that's the whole sort of notion of cross-lingual phoneme recognition. Use phonemes or patterns in one language to identify texts in another. Right, moving on. Elaborating upon cross-lingual phoneme recognition and how I used it. So, in case you don't know, Hindi is the most widely spoken language in India. I think it has around 700 million speakers at least, primary speakers, and then a number of secondary speakers as well. It's definitely the most commonly spoken language in the world, and not in the world, in India. Uh, and yeah, it's just very universal in India, to the point where you can go to the most remote place, and if you don't know their language, you can sort of get by just speaking Hindi. So before that, yeah, I just wanted to touch upon this. So there are different levels of a language and the structure of a language. There's phonology, syntax, and morphology, and uh, and so here are some more features of languages, which is important to note because nearly every language has every language has a phonology, a syntax, and a morphology, and every language is in the capacity of a human being. It externalizes, it's rational, and it evolves. So you can see that you can compare two completely unrelated languages, and they will surely have these features in common, regardless of their script, the affliction of the language, whether it's tonal or not. It will have certain common features. You can pick the most like discrete languages possible, and they will still have some features in common. So coming back to what I did was I used phonemes. Phonemes can be described as perceptually distinct units of sound in a specified language. So phonemes are sort of like the of building blocks of language. You can think of them as the atoms of language in that sense. Um, right. So let's say that you're able to distinguish between bad and bad. So the b and the b are different from one another, and therefore they're different phonemes. Now, just to give sort of an idea and a flavor of what I did, um, imagine that you're speaking Spanish, then it's quite possible that you'll be able to pick up words from other Romance languages, especially those from, let's say, Italian, and maybe some from Portuguese as well, or some language in the Iberian Peninsula. Um, right. So, just to give an example, biblioteca comes from Greek, and the Spanish word for library is actually similar. It's biblioteca. So you can see that there are underlying patterns that exist in various languages, especially those that are close to one another, from a morphological and a syntactical point of view. Again, like I said, even if the languages aren't close to one another, they still possess certain features that are close to one another. However, in practice, it's always wise to use languages that are morphologically and syntactically close to one another. So, similar to how humans can pick up words and phonemes from different languages, neural networks can also use the power of patterns to identify text. My research worked on using the data from Hindi, the most spoken language in India, and then fine tuning it on only 500 sentences of Kangri. And the results were astonishingly great. This phenomena is referred to as cross-lingual phoneme recognition. Right. So now moving on to my research and the steps that I did to undertake it. So I went on Google Scholar, which is a great website, by the way. And I found Dr. Shweta Chauhan, who was a researcher at the National Institute of Technology, Hamirpur, and she had compiled a massive text corpora, a bilingual text corpora, from Kangri to Hindi, and she'd also done Hindi to English and Kangri to English. So she basically worked in neural machine translation, and that was quite interesting to me. She'd worked in statistical and neural machine translation and in Kangri. So I approached her, I mailed her, and I basically got a response 4 hours later. And since I live quite far away from where the Kangra Valley actually is, like I mentioned, I live in a city. I live in New Delhi, so it's actually quite far away from where the Kangra Valley is quite far away from where I live. So I traveled 1,000 kilometers to the Kangra Valley to discuss the prospect of saving the language of my ancestors. And so I stayed there for a weekend originally, and I translated the Leipzig Jakarta list of words to Kangri. And I documented it using the International Phonetic Alphabet, which is called IPA. it is a tool that allows linguists to, ensure that there's no, deviation between how things are actually spoken. So, let's say you want to describe to someone that water is spoken in a certain way, then you will use the IPA to describe that, because everyone can have different pronunciations of water. Um, right. So over the weekend, I translated the Leipzig Jakarta list of words, which is sort of like 100-word list, which is prepared by linguists to, for this purpose exactly, to translate words from that list to an endangered language. It's considered the first step in reviving a language. It's used by linguists to also test the degree of chronological separation of languages. Right. And interestingly enough, there is no connection between Leipzig and Jakarta. Uh, like, they're just, I have no idea why they were chosen, and actually, no one does. Why? No one knows why it's named the Leipzig Jakarta list of words. Uh, and if you look at it, it's actually quite reminiscent of the fact that, well, language is omnipresent. Well, Leipzig is in Germany and Jakarta is in Indonesia, and yet these two came together to form a list of 100 words that is used universally. Moving on, so the work of Singh et al. In a similar language called Punjabi showed that audio recordings from the same demographic have extremely high word error rates when tested on data sets of the same languages with different demographics. So that was something that was extremely important. And as I was collecting my auditory corpus, I made sure that I had audio recordings from various different individuals from different regions of the Kangra Valley. So there's Hamirpur, there's Palampur, there's Una, etc. So these are the different regions from which I collected the audio recordings. And then what I did was I conducted experiments using various state of the art ASR systems. So I actually have a huge list of ASR models that I used to sort of get a preliminary baseline word error rate. Because I realized that unless I was able to identify how the world's topmost ASR models performed, I wouldn't be able to actually train an ASR model myself or pick an ASR model, especially when there are so many. So I did that, and then the first experiment was conducted on Google using Google's STT, speech to text API model, and the word error rate was unimpressive. It was around 50%. But then biasing the ASR using common phrases and common words, I was able to reduce the WER, and it reached 32% in optimal conditions. And then came a very big shock. Using the newly launched Whisper, a word error rate of 21% was recorded in optimal condition with small lengths of clean audio recordings. Now, again, this isn't actually indicative of the entire word error rate. This was just the optimal condition. In reality, the word error rate hovered around, again, like 45 to 50%. But in clean conditions, it was able to reach 21%, which was quite impressive to me. And that sort of gave me an idea of what I was about to do. Right, so my model, the Whisper Large version 2 for Kangri, is a fine-tuned version of the Whisper Hindi Large on the BridgeCon Snow Mountain dataset for the low resource language Kangri. And so the results of the research were that the loss was around 29%, and the word error rate was 17.4%. Using just 500 sentences and around 5 to 4 hours of training data, I was able to achieve a word error rate that is considered usable for most languages, including Kangri. Um, Now, I'm about to share a couple of training hyperparameters, the learning rate, the train batch size, eval batch size, etc. These are quite important when it comes to the specifications that you need for your ASR, but they're quite technical, and I'm not going to delve into too much detail. One important thing to note, however, is that I used 5,000 training steps. You can change that. You can use 1,000. You can use 2,000. I just used 5,000 because it was the one with which I achieved optimal results without actually burning a hole through my pocket. Right. And so the word error rate after each step is shown over here. So it was it started at 18% and then it decreased to 17.4%. As you can see, it is slightly, ever so slightly overfit. But when you actually test it on data that is not in the data set of the ASR, it performs decently well. It hovers around 17 to 18%. So even though it's slightly overfit, it performs pretty well on data that isn't there in its actual data set. Um, right, and in an effort to reduce the overfitness of this model, I will be expanding the auditory corpus further. Um, right, and that's basically it. That's the research that I did. And now I'll be moving on to the challenges that I faced. And I'll also talk about what this project helped me with, and sort of the recognition that I've received for this project. So the challenges that I faced primarily were convincing the villagers and the people that I'm not someone who's doing this for my own benefit, and it's very important for them to speak their native language. There's this notion in India that if you speak English fluently, or if you speak Hindi fluently, you belong to the upper class, and sort of a social construct has been created that uses language as the determining factor for literacy and class. And that, in my opinion, is extremely dangerous because destroys it destroys the linguistic diversity of our beautiful nation. And therefore, I was trying to combat that, but it was extremely difficult to convince the villagers to sort of act in what for them was an an unintuitive way, basically, because they were used to speaking with uh, foreigners and people from cities in Hindi or English. And but surprisingly, once I got them to open up, it was a smooth sailing process throughout. Uh, I wasn't able to connect with everyone, but I was able to connect with a large populace, including translators, who I helped gain jobs in various multinational corporations, including Lenovo. I know for a fact that Lenovo is working on trying to install Kangri in their phones right now. And so I was able to connect Lenovo and a couple of translators, which provided them with a stable income, which they wouldn't have normally received. So that was, I think, the most rewarding part of the process. As for other challenges I faced, one challenge that I faced was the lack of GPU and CPU present in my region generally, and also the fact that GPUs are quite expensive, and this was quite a resource intensive project because I had to train all first I had to pick a ASR model that I was going to fine tune on, and that took a lot of time. And then I had to fine tune that model on 500 sentences of a data set, which further took more time. And so the estimated cost for this was around uh, 2 lakh INR, which is around, let me just calculate. It's around it's around 2,000 to 2,500 US dollars, which is quite a lot for one project. And so what I was able to do was I was actually able to reach out to the government of India, and they were actually able to help me out And so now I'm being funded by the government. I don't have to use any resources of my own. The government has been providing with me with all the GPUs that I need. The specifications were quite specific. I needed a Nvidia GPU and a CPU, and I needed a specific multi GPU setup, and they were able to provide me with that. Um, and the only reason they were able to do so is because I showed them the importance of trying to save an endangered language. Apart from that, I was also able to get the Spirit of Ramanujan scholarship for $4,800, uh, hugely in part due to this project and the importance of trying to save my own language using AI. And so I just like to leave with some parting notes. I just like to say that it seems quite counterintuitive to me that uh, that the thing that's causing the downfall of these languages, which is globalization, is also the thing that will eventually be their saving grace. So globalization is sort of like a two-edged sword. We need to use it carefully. Um, and yeah, I think that's about it. Dr. Ba, I think I've concluded my talk.
Awesome. Thank you very much. Like that was certainly super interesting. So let me activate my video here. Okay. Right. Before I ask my questions, I would like to give the audience the chance to ask their questions. So this is now going to be a little bit more complicated because we are not on Teams anymore, and you just cannot freely speak. So everyone, if you want to ask your question, just essentially request to get on stage, and then I'll just move you over there.
Should I stop presenting or?
You can leave the slides because we might want to go back to some, right? Kind of to look certain things up.
Sure.
Right.
Also, I just wanted to say that the slides for this presentation were made using SlidesGo. They're an awesome tool. I think you should check it out. Awesome tool.
Okay, thank you very much. You might want to share that in our project. So there is this kind of community project about like tools to use for research. So you might want to throw in a link in a short description and your experience. So thank you very much. Right, audience. Questions. Questions. Okay, Ben, hang on. Give me. You will not always give me some time to invite to speak. Okay, Ben. You should be able to speak now.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay, excellent. So, okay, I'd like to ask a question to check my understanding real quick. So, basically, if I understand this correctly, what you've done here is you're training an AI audio or speech-to-text model. So, it basically transcribes spoken Kangri audio recordings into text. Am I getting that correct?
Yes, you're getting that correct. Yeah.
All right, excellent, cool. So I wonder then, after this, what do you think? What would you say is the next step to in preserving the language then, after you've done this?
Right. So the next steps I have are actually quite logical. The next step will be to release this speech-to-text software once it's reached around 10% word error rate in the form of an app, so that the common populace can use it effectively. After releasing the app and teaming with other multinational corporations such as Lenovo, I plan on submitting a proposal to the government to introduce Kangri as an official language of India, or at least one of the recognized languages. There was actually quite a debate about this a couple of years ago, and basically Kangri is being classified as a dialect of Hindi, even though it has poor mutual intelligibility with it. And so definitely the next steps are to get more recognition and spread more awareness about Kangri, but also to launch apps and websites and connect with multinational corporations so that the Kangri people are able to access the benefits of globalization in their own language.
All right. Thank you. That sounds really cool and interesting.
Yeah, I think so too. So that sounds also very ambitious. I think you were thinking big. That you said, okay, I haven't just done this project, and now I'm kind of done with it. You're really thinking how this could be utilized. And I think this is an absolutely fabulous idea. Now, kind of maybe a similar question related to what Ben has asked comes from me. So how would in terms of researching the language. So how would the app that you're aiming to develop help for that?
All right. So imagine Siri and imagine Cortana and all of these AI models, and now ChatGPT as well. Imagine if the Kangri people could access that in their native language. There are many stories that I heard that were of cultural importance to the Kangrins. That described how they would pass down knowledge from generation to generation. Now, imagine if all of that knowledge could, one, be stored by us, but two, it could also they could also use that knowledge and ask specific questions about their fields and their crops and their methods of hunting or whatever to the internet. And basically, this project is about, like I said, how I'm using globalization to combat globalization. The advent of AI has definitely had a positive impact on many things, but the advent of globalization has had a negative impact on languages and endangered languages such as Kangri, where certain languages like Hindi and English predominate over these endangered languages. So it's definitely important for the people to reclaim their language, and I think the most effective way of doing so is actually to enable them to access the benefits of globalization using an app that they can access in their native language. So I would definitely, so for example, if I have something to say in Hindi, Hindi is luckily available on Siri, so I can talk to Siri in Hindi or Google in Hindi. But that's not the case with Kangri. And that I think is discrimination on the basis of linguistic, a native linguistic thing. So that's not very great. And I plan to reduce the linguistic disparity between languages.
Okay. So that is all kind of right. So let me just put it together because I've kind of now specifically asked about research. I'm getting it that it is like there's a huge potential use case for the people who are speaking Kangri. And you now kind of saying right. So if they use the language for the AI tools that we have, right, that will also help us to record like their knowledge, their ancestry, stories, right? And this is kind of what shapes us, right, as a culture, stories that we're telling to each other. Have I understood that correctly?
Yeah, definitely.
Right. So, but then, how would you go on and record these stories? So would you kind of do like the idea that you say, okay, I have this model, and that model can be an underlying model for like many apps, and one app that I would, for example, be designing where people could be just talking their stories into the app, and it would record them. And that would be then, for example, that data, which is of course also an issue. If people are happy with that data being safe, that data could be then searched like with language researchers or like linguistic centers where the language can be studied.
Yeah, definitely. That in fact, let me just share my screen to another tab. Uh, so I had previously mentioned Dr. Shweta Chauhan from NIT, and she's been working on this for the past 2 years. She has basically collected a lot of data that includes all these stories, but all of this is in the text format. So if I don't know if any of you can read Devanagari, probably not, but all of these are basically like thousands of lines of stories and cultural cultural importance that she was able to record. And the Kangri people were surprisingly very happy to lend their voice to this thing. Perhaps because she's also a native Kangri speaker. So I'm definitely working with her, Dr. Shweta Chauhan. Please do check her out on GitHub. I'll share the link as well. So she's been doing this for longer than I have, and she's been working on the cultural aspect of storytelling and how to record it. And she's collected more than 1.8 million sentences in Kangri, which is, I think, just mind-blowingly. So if you look over here, Kavitai is poems in Hindi. Lok Geet are sort of the songs and oral songs that you sing. These are very melodious songs that people sing that have a moral lesson. I know that one of the famous example of a Lok Geet is the Panch Tantra and Ghazal. Ghazal is sort of a Sufi. It's again a poem, but it's more of a narratory poem. So all of this has probably been done already by Dr. Shweta. I will be working on recording not the text but the audio and the auditory part of it.
Also, awesome. Okay, yeah, that is great. It's great. Compliments very nicely. Right. More questions from the audience. Again, remember that you will have to get on stage to be able to talk. Right. Seems there are no more questions from the audience, then I'm going to be asking my questions. So in your presentation, you've been talking about the various kind of common structures of language. So you've been mentioning morphology and syntax of a language. So can you maybe explain what we should understand as the morphology of a language, and how did you use these aspects kind of in your model, or did you not use them at all?
No, I definitely did use them. Again, I will be sort of reverting back to Dr. Chauhan's study over here. Right, so I'll start and I'll explain this in detail. When I started off, fact that the lack of the loss of aspiration and gaining of tone hasn't been fully realized in Kangri. The loss of voicing hasn't reached Kangri yet, and moreover, there are certain things that you will notice when you listen to the people speaking Kangri. If someone speaks Punjabi pretty well, they'll be able to understand Kangri to an extent. Um, but the thing that really differentiates Kangri is the fact that it has a lot of it's a very sweet language, I must say, compared to and this is obviously subjective, but compared to Punjabi, which to the native speaker can sound quite harsh. Kangri is a relatively sweet language. Listening to it makes you feel, well, it's just In the phoneme chart, there's only a again, I don't want to delve too much into the linguistic properties of Kangri because I'm not a linguist, but certain semi vowels in Kangri are not present. Um, there are words such as pila, and there's a retroflex lateral flap in pila, and the and if you speak Hindi, you'll be surprised to hear that there's a lot of r sounds in Kangri, and so on and so forth. There are subtle differences, but over time, these differences compound and make Kangri a totally different language to that of Punjabi or Hindi and Garhwali and other Pahari languages as well.
So does it relates to Sanskrit or is it completely different from it?
Um, to be honest, I'm not entirely sure how it relates to Sanskrit. Like the script, the Tangri script is definitely more similar to the Gurmukhi script. So the native script is definitely similar to the Punjabi script. I don't know if it relates to Sanskrit or not. However, I can tell you that people have told me in Shimla, which is not where Kangri is spoken, that their language is entirely derived from Sanskrit.
Okay, and one more question I had, like for example, how has the usage of Kangri evolved over the time, and like what factors have influenced its preservation, maybe?
All right, so one of the, like I mentioned, globalization has definitely been the biggest sort of danger to Kangri. The rise of languages such as Hindi and English have definitely made it difficult for Kangri to spread in the way that other languages would have spread. The usage of Kangri was has slowly declined. It was around 1.17 million speakers in 2011. It's substantially lesser now, even though the 2021 census hasn't been performed yet. Kangri has been in a decline. However, with these preservation efforts from me and other linguists as well, including those at NIT Hamirpur, I think that soon the Kangrans are going to realize the importance of speaking their own language, and it will increase. The main problem that I face, that Kangri faces, is that people think that it's less classy to speak in their own native language, which is unintuitive to me. Yeah, that's about it.
And my other question is like, how do you identify the native or the local Kangri speakers? Like, due to the surnames or any kind of a group or something like that, you will be able to
Uh,
identify.
No, not really. It's so I reached out to NIT Hamirpur, and they were able to direct me to authors and translators who translate texts from Hindi to Kangri and write literature in Kangri. Uh, some of them also know the Kangri script, and so those were the verified sources that I used for Kangri. Apart from that, I was also, in order to make sure that the auditory corpus um, didn't contain audio from only one person, and it didn't have only one dialect of Kangri. I went to different places to talk about, to record people and the various ways in which they spoke.
And also, I wanted to ask, like, what writing systems like is used to represent the Kangri language, and are there any current efforts to standardize this orthography? Maybe any current efforts which is going on right now?
Yeah, in fact, using ASR standardizes the orthography to an extent because, um, like I mentioned before, so if you notice this script right above the Kangri, below the language thing, that's the Tangri script. If you know Punjabi, it's quite similar to the Gurmukhi script, but it's slightly different. Um, and just below that is the Devanagari script. The Devanagari script is being used currently to represent and write Kangri, which is the script that I used for my ASR as well. However, like I said, it's not standardized at all, and it'll take a long time to make it standardized. And one way in which I'm planning on doing that is actually going to different schools and talking about and introducing Kangri in schools, and maybe like a specific period that is dedicated to learning only Kangri and things like that. Uh, so that will sort of standardize the orthography. But there is a lot of work to be done in that aspect, yes.
Yeah, that answers my question.
Okay, right. So meanwhile I've returned. So Discord's died on me. So I'm now in the browser. First of all, can everyone hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Awesome. Thank you. Right. So unfortunately, that means that your response to my initial question about the morphology has not been recorded. Do you mind briefly summarizing it? So because again, it's not been recorded.
Right. So I mentioned that the morphology of languages such as Hindi is quite similar to the morphology and syntax of Kangri. Both Hindi and Kangri use specific phonemes. Both Hindi and Kangri use the Devanagari script for writing, and both of them have certain common features in the consonant IPA chart as well as the vowel chart. One difference that I would say is that Kangri is definitely a more tonal language as compared to Hindi, but apart from that, there are certain morphological and syntactical similarities, and of course similarities in the phonemes that are used in the two languages that I was able to exploit using the cross-lingual phoneme recognition.
Right. So this is where it's being exploited. So maybe can you give like a short explanation or a definition what a morphology actually is exactly?
All right, so morphology is the study of, well, it's a subset of the study of languages, which is morphology actually means the study of structure, how words are formed and how they relate to other words in the same language. It analyzes the structure of words. There are certain things as stems, root words, prefixes, suffixes, intonation, inflection, the tonal thing that I mentioned, that's part of morphology as well. And yeah, so that's essentially what morphology is. It's the study of the structure of words and parts of words such as stems and root words, etc., etc. Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you. I mean, since I've not been here, Abdullah has been already asking his questions. So, are there more questions from the audience? Now, I'll let questions from the audience, clarifications. Right, no one's saying anything. Then maybe a last question from me. Kind of just focusing back on that research that you've been doing. So what have you learned about research and how to conduct it by doing this project? What do you think are the kind of key important traits that one has to have if one wants to conduct such a research project? And therefore, what would you recommend to all our other members curious and interested in doing a research project? How should they approach it?
The first thing I would definitely say is that don't expect any result. When I started this project, I was quite expectant, but over time I realized that I had to manage my expectations in a way that I wasn't, after a certain point, I wasn't really expecting anything from the research, and I think that's definitely uh, uh, my experience says that you need to manage your expectations well. And secondly, I would say please don't start a research project solely for the aim of college. I've seen some people do that. That is not a good idea uh, at all. Please refrain from doing that. Although, again, research projects, if you're generally interested in research, can be good for your application, but don't do it solely for that. That sucks out all the fun from research. The other part that I would like to emphasize is that I learned that research actually has the ability to influence people in real life. I know that a lot of people separate academia from the uh, industry and the real life, and sort of there's this whole notion of the fact that research isn't really important to individuals. And I would just like to say that in my experience, I was able to completely dismantle that notion. um, so those are the things that I learned by doing this project. Of course, I'm still a novice in terms of research, but uh, those are the things that I learned, and hopefully I was able to tell you guys something about the cool project that I've been doing.
Oh, absolutely.
Absolutely.
Right.
Right.
So we're coming
We're
towards an
coming
end. If
towards
there are
an
no
end. If
other
there are no other
questions that
questions
people like to ask, any other
any other
questions?
questions?
No?
Yeah.
Yeah?
So,
Yeah?
yeah, I had a question. So, for example, if you want to give a similar suggestion to someone about like how to preserve the language and how to protect the endangered language, so what kind of suggestion or advice would you give to someone which is in the same situation as you, like kind of?
So I would definitely say first you need to identify what the main problem is and why the language is being spoken in a why the language is declining and why is it endangered. Then I would again, if the language has a standard orthography and its data is being recorded properly, then ASR may or may not be as useful as it was in this case. In this case, ASR was extremely useful because there was a lack of standardized Kangri literature, recorded Kangri literature, that is. So definitely identify the problems first, and then accordingly use a tool to identify. Don't And also I would like to say, don't just use AI or ML just because it's a buzzword. In this case, it was actually quite important for me to use it because it allowed me to bypass the manual transcription bottlenecks. It may not do so in every case. And so yeah, that's about it.
That answers my question. Thank
Awesome. I think the last thing you mentioned is very important. AI is a tool and it is a very important tool, but it's not the only tool out there and it's not the most useful tool for everything there is. I think this is something important to take away. So thanks a lot for saying that. Yes, here it was identified as the most useful tool and implemented brilliantly. Thank you so much again, and for everyone attending. For everyone who has more questions specific to the AI implementation, like how the model has been trained or how the parameter sweeps were done and so on, please ask your questions and continue the discussion in the respective project thread on Discord. An absolutely fantastic talk. It's a super interesting research project, and like you said, it is a research that has a strong human impact. We congratulate you and applaud you. It is absolutely amazing what you've done, and it's also amazing that you've had such a huge impact already. What I find most amazing, though, about your project is that you were not afraid to take it and make it big. Think big and then really push it. This is just great. And I'm super happy for you and happy for all the people involved that you've actually succeeded. This is absolutely awesome because it's not a given that we succeed. So huge congratulations. Absolutely amazing. Please keep us updated how it's going, how it's developing. Absolutely fantastic. Thank you very much for this amazing community event. And yeah, let's keep the discussions going in the respective project thread.
Thank you, Dr. Ba. Thank you, everyone.